last week, I want to encourage you guys to ask your parents, ask some of your neighbors about their experience in 9/11. 2001, I know sounds like it happened a long time ago. It really wasn't that long ago. I was alive. I know exactly where I was and what I was doing when we got the announcement, and I'm sure your parents can tell you all kinds of stories about what they were doing as well. In the book so far, we learned about our main character, Lucas, who loves to play football. He lives close to New York City. His dad and his uncle Benny are both firefighters in New York City. And Lucas is playing football. He's at practice one day, and then he misses a catch and he gets a concussion. And so he's off the field for 12 days. And we also learn a little bit about his dad, of how 2 years ago his dad got really, really burned in a warehouse fire that he and his uncle Benny were fighting. And so his dad is quieter than he used to be, and he's not as joyful or have a booming laugh as he used to be. And Lucas is kind of mentioning of how he kind of misses the old days a little bit. But that's where we left off. And today we're going to be reading chapters 4 and 5. So, chapter 4, Monday, September 10th, 2001. Monday came, the last day before Lucas would be allowed back on the field. He'd been crossing out the days on his calendar, counting down. Mom picked him up early from school for a doctor's appointment. She wanted him checked out before he was cleared to play. "I'm fine," Lucas said. "Can't you tell?" Lucas lifted his arm and flexed his bicep. Mom laughed. "You look incredible." Mom had decided to take him to a new doctor. "I hear he's the best," she said. We were lucky he could fit you in." His name was Dr. Barrett. With his blonde crew cut and his huge shoulders, he looked more like a linebacker than a doctor. Dr. Barrett brought Lucas into an exam room and checked him over, looking in his eyes, listening to his heart and lungs. He asked him to walk across the room with one foot in front of the other. Lucas was sure he passed all the tests. After the exam, Dr. Barrett waved Mom and Lucas back into his office. The wall was covered with framed diplomas and pictures of football players. Lucas looked at a photo of a rough-looking man in a Denver Broncos uniform. "That's Dan Brock," Dr. Barrett said. "Have you heard of him?" The name was familiar, but Lucas didn't know why. He was All-American at the University of Wisconsin, then a third-round pick for the NFL. Dr. Barrett pointed to the next photo in the row, a big smiling man with a busted-up nose and chubby baby cheeks. "That's Tyrus Balone," he said. "He was a star tackle at Florida State, and then he played 10 years for Green Bay." There were 3 other pictures on the wall. It was only the last one that Lucas recognized. "Is that Stan Walsh? Isn't he? He was dead. He had died just a few months ago. Uncle Benny had been so upset about it. He played against Stan Walsh when he was a college player." Dr. Barrett nodded, seeing that Lucas knew about Stan Walsh. "He had just turned 40, the doctor said. He had some kind of brain disease you see in men in their 80s. Dr. Barrett pointed up at the wall, at all of the players. "All of those men are dead," he said. "They donated their brains to our lab so we can study them. They all died because of concussions." A chill ran down Lucas's spine. He looked at Mom. Her eyes were wide with shock. "We used to think concussions were like sprained ankles," Dr. Barrett said. "You get dinged, you let it heal, and you're good to go. But now we know that too many concussions can actually change the brain." "How many concussions is too many?" Mom asked. Lucas held his breath. "I would say that an 11-year-old boy, 3 concussions in 2 years is too many." The room was silent. Lucas could feel the eyes of those football players looking down at him. "I can stay out for another week," Lucas said. It would be torture, but he'd be back in time for the first game. "I'm sorry, Lucas," Dr. Barrett said, "but what I'm suggesting is that you never play football again." All night, Lucas argued and begged. He had a million reasons why that doctor was wrong, and he told Mom and Dad practically every single one. When that didn't work, he offered to sit out for 2 more weeks, then 3. "Just please don't make me quit." Finally, Dad put his hand on Lucas's shoulders. "Lucas," Dad said in a soft voice, "football is a game. I know you love it, but it is just a game." a game. Of course Lucas knew that. But that game was the most important thing in his life. What would he do without his team? That night he lay awake in bed for hours, thinking. It was past midnight when he realized what he needed to do. He had to see Uncle Benny. Before Mom and Dad talked to Coach, before it was too late. Dad left early in the morning. He was teaching a class at The Rock, the firefighter training center across the bridge from Manhattan on Randall's Island. Mom dropped Lucas off at the bus stop on her way to work. The minute her car disappeared, Lucas sprinted back home. He grabbed his bike and pedaled as fast as he could to the train station. He caught the 7:17 with 1 minute to spare. Lucas knew how wrong this was, to skip school, to sneak into the city without Mom and Dad knowing. But right then, none of that mattered. He had to see Uncle Benny. Somehow, Uncle Benny would make this right. Chapter 5. Tuesday, September 11, 2001, 8:15 a.m. New York City, New York. Lucas had made this trip so many times with his dad, he knew it by heart. The train to Penn Station, the subway to Canal Street. When he got out of the subway, he looked up and found his landmark, the 2 silver buildings jutting into the sky, the twin towers of the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center was 9 blocks south of the fire station, so he just followed his view of the towers until he hit the right street. As Lucas walked, he thought of the last time he and Dad visited the Trade Center. They'd gotten there early, before the observation deck was open, but the guard noticed Dad's FD&Y hat and let them go up. They had the place to themselves. The view from the 110th floor was looking down on Manhattan from a cloud. The whole island stretched out in front of them. The buildings below looked like toys. The rivers like trickling streams. The cars and trucks looked smaller than the models Lucas and Dad built in the basement. They stood there, just as Dad and Lucas, alone on the top of the world. That was right before the warehouse fire, only 2 years before now. It seemed like such a very long time. When Lucas got to the firehouse, the garage door was open, and there, right next to the sea grave, was Uncle Benny. He glanced up and gave an offhand smile, obviously thinking that Lucas was just a neighborhood kid hoping to get a peek at the truck. But then Uncle Benny looked at Lucas again. "Hey you," he said with a surprised grin, striding over. He pulled Lucas into the garage. Lucas breathed in the familiar smell of diesel, fuel, and sweat. He'd always loved the sight of all the guys' black bunker coats hanging on the walls, the pants already tucked into the big black boots. The firehouse was crowded. The guys from the last shift were saying their goodbyes, and the morning men were just getting settled. Guys came from all over the firehouse to say hi to Lucas, wrapping him in bear hugs, rubbing his head, and telling him he was growing like a weed. "I've missed my assistant," said Georgie, who drove the truck and also did most of the cooking. On Lucas's visits with Dad, his favorite job was helping Georgie cook his famous tomato sauce. Chief Douglas came over, his smile flashing from under his bushy gray mustache, followed by Mark, one of the youngest guys. He and his family lived not far from Lucas. His 8-year-old twin boys were football fanatics, and Mark coached their team. Last season, they came to one of Lucas's games. Afterwards, the twins had asked Lucas for his autograph. Suddenly, Uncle Benny looked around. "Where's your pops?" he said. "He's already down at the Rock?" Lucas shook his head. "Your mom brought you?" Uncle Benny asked. Lucas shook his head again. Uncle Benny eyed Lucas. His smile faded. "You okay?" he said softly. Lucas didn't answer. Uncle Benny looked at Georgie, who gave him a nod. "Cover me, will you guys?" Uncle Benny asked. "I'll be back in a few." Uncle Benny led Lucas outside and they started walking. "This is some kind of day, isn't it?" he said, squinting up at the bright blue sky. Neither of them said anything more, until finally Lucas came out with it. "Mom and Dad are making me quit football," he said, "because of my concussions." Lucas watched Uncle Benny's face, waiting for his eyebrows to mash together in anger for his cheeks to burn furious red. But Uncle Benny just nodded. Then he looked at Lucas. "I've been so worried about you, kiddo," he said. "You've got yourself a darn good brain. I don't want you ending up like poor Stan Walsh." And then it suddenly hit Lucas. It was Uncle Benny who got Mom to bring him to see Dr. Barrett. He must have known he'd been Stan Walsh's doctor. Lucas had come all this way because he thought Uncle Benny would help him. And Uncle Benny was the reason he had to quit? Uncle Benny stopped and put his hands on Lucas's shoulders. It seemed like he was trying to keep Lucas pinned to the ground, like otherwise he'd fly away. He stared at Lucas with those bright light eyes of his. "You'll find something else," he said. "What else do I have?" Lucas wanted to ask. But before he could, something over Lucas's shoulder caught Uncle Benny's attention. Lucas turned, and then he saw it too. A glint of silver against the bright blue. Out of nowhere, a huge jet airplane zoomed into view. It was flying very low. So that's where we'll end it today. Next week we will continue and we'll read chapters 6 through 8. Hope you join us. Bye.